This is something that I feel a lot of people feel right now in the modern industry, the idea that games are just too long, people aren't finishing them, and the idea of the 100-hour game or the infinitely playable game that never ends. Now, a piece came out from PC Gamer, but it was originally from Kiwi Talks featuring former Starfield lead quest designer Will Shen, who mentioned the ongoing fatigue with 100-hour games and where it comes from. And then this blew up across social media, across Reddit, etc., where people were weighing in, just saying like, well, Starfield sucks, that's why we didn't finish it. Or, well, actually, there is a general lethargy around 100-hour games, and it does tie into various sort of capitalistic pursuits in regards to how games are made, trying to make this thing that you'll play forever and they can monetize forever, or at least for a good few years. Shen says a growing section of the audience is becoming fatigued. I'm not personally responsible, but part of what happened was the success of games like Skyrim and Fallout 4, these really big titles that you can play pretty much forever. There's still a lot of people who play Skyrim even after all these years, and the idea of these evergreen games that you could just sink thousands of hours into that hit the industry. Now, alongside that, he starts to mention the influx of tough third-person games like Dark Souls and the rise of crafting and survival mechanics from the likes of Minecraft as his example. Combined, Shen says that there's an overall lethargy with these massive, seemingly infinite games, and a push towards shorter games with dedicated communities is now coming up. Now, he cites Wrong Organ's Mouthwashing, which is a sort of horror, psychological horror hit that landed at the end of last year. And Shen says that's a really good way for the industry to go. And Shen says the community engagement around the story of Mouthwashing is only possible because everyone who's a fan actually played it all the way through to the end. Mouthwashing is a huge hit because it's short. There are other factors in that, like the execution, nice iconic key art, all that kind of stuff. But that game doesn't succeed nearly as well if it were longer and had a whole bunch of side quests and miscellaneous content. The shortness is the point, and that level of engagement was so refreshing to see from a developer who's done a lot of big games. Like, oh, you can have a fan community conversation around a game that's much shorter because the shortness allows everyone to engage fully with the entirety of the product. Death to 100-hour games, Josh Brown.
So
Kill them.
Death to some 100-hour games, Scott Tilford. I sort of matured. I don't know why I said it like that. Matured. On my... You've popped me there. You really have. You really stopped me in my tracks. I really matured on my takes on 100-hour games, I think, over the past few years. Because I used to be right with you. Shorter games for all. Let's just do it. Make games that I can get through.
Yes.
But there admittedly have been so many exceptions that have used their length well that I have absolutely adored. And I think that's what I have an issue with. I'm going to ask the question to every developer: do you ever think, why are we making the game the length that it is? And I want them to think about that question more. And if the reason is we want player retention, or we want to just pad it out so they don't go to anything else, and we feel like content just for content's sake is going to sell us more copies, I think you got to rethink some stuff, right? Because you look at some of the games that were mentioned there, those third-person, harder action games from Software. Elden Ring, to me, is such a special experience because it is a game where you can play it for 70 hours and stumble upon a huge, dense, unique dungeon that you didn't even think would be in the game. You always assume that the developers are going to run out of steam at some point, and you think, I've played 100-hour games before. They're going to have to start reusing assets. They're going to have to start relying on the formula. And of course they do in certain situations, but the amount of bespoke content in that campaign is crazy. Same with, in my opinion, something like Red Dead Redemption 2, where you can play hundreds of hours of it, and it all feels authored, it all feels important. I think the issue is where every game is trying to do that just for the sake of a runtime. And I think a negative is Assassin's Creed. That jumping from a series where you can complete the games in about 20 hours to a series where the games take about 100 hours to complete. I think that's to the detriment, not just of the games themselves, but of the perception of the series. You mentioned stories there, stories that are built to get through. No one's really, apart from the diehard fans, talking about the story of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, or the overall story that's continuing between all of those games.
Because they barely got through it.
Yeah, I played them, right? And I don't know what the through line story is to connect all of those titles, really. But that's in direct contrast to the original Assassin's Creed trilogy and the other games that came between them.
Massively.
Where everyone was playing everyone, and you had a working knowledge of what that story was, and it fueled theories, it fueled engagement, like they mentioned there.
I did a weird gasp there, but it's still interesting because I feel like on the Assassin's Creed, you can give an example for Assassin's Creed. AC Mirage was their return to a classic Assassin's Creed game. I know it sold well enough. I remember them saying that it sold well versus expectations. but it's not what Assassin's Creed is in the modern day. It's not Valhalla. It's not the upcoming Shadows. It's not this massively huge open world thing with the Helix credits that are plugged in. I mean, that's, if you answer that question of why are we doing this, in Ubisoft's case, it was how many times can we sell you Helix credits with that one vendor in the likes of Origins and Odyssey that resets missions all the time. You can play that thing forever if you want, but they're still giving you a single player experience. I would take games that were more like AC Mirage. Obviously, I've said this loads of times, but I do wonder like how much that is the solution to, if they are now noticing all the metrics of people just not finishing these games, who the hell is it even for anyway? Like, I guess the assumption is that you get a select number of players that would be referred to as like the whales, the people with the most disposable income, who will play a game, they won't finish the story, they won't see the bulk of it, but they will engage with those repeat cycle mechanics, those like the weapon drops, the loot systems, whatever it is. And are you just making a game that seems huge to draw those people in, and then you just monetize them and them alone? I think that side of it is kind of interesting. Shen says, I'm not personally responsible for the growing, the way that like mission design and stuff has gone over time. And you mentioned the idea of a game being so, it has to justify itself if it's that big, like a Last of Us 2 or a Red Dead 2 or something like that. Starfield had so many repeat interiors. And I remember, as much as I love Starfield, and I genuinely did have a blast with that thing, I feel like we're the only two people who really liked it. But there's a whole bunch of interiors that repeat in that game. And the first time I took on a side mission on a completely different wing of the galaxy and went down inside the science base, and it was the same base, all had the same things inside it, and a whole part of me was like, oh, okay.
Starfield,
it's a video game again.
Really didn't help itself with that stuff.
No.
And it's a shame because that's rightly so what a lot of people focused on, because you can get trapped in a loop in Starfield where you're going from planet to planet, and arguably you're playing it wrong, and it's not your fault because Bethesda has kind of pushed you in that direction. But there is, I think, a way to play Starfield wrong, and it is to just look at the random activities and kind of go off on your own. You have a much better time in Starfield if you follow the side quests, if you follow the main quests, because those main quests do bring you to places that are unique and where you have these bespoke side mission threads that go on for hours and hours, and you're constantly finding new stuff. But you can ignore all of that and just go to like the procedurally generated elements of it and get stuck in those loops. And I think that's dangerous. Like, Fallout 4 is a huge game. Why does Fallout 4 need the procedurally generated missions in it? That's the kind of, like, that to me, that's always the drawback of those games, because everything else feels so authored. So when you get to Starfield and you've kind of got two different games, you've got a space exploration one where you can go anywhere across 1,000 planets and do it wherever you want. That is totally barren for the most part. That is full of those repeated interiors, repeated assets, repeated gameplay loops. And you've got the other half, which is a regular Bethesda RPG with the amount of side quests and unique NPCs and locations that you would expect. But the two styles, I find, just brush up against each other in complements. Like, they don't complement each other, and who is that for? It doesn't help anyone, because you just have to sift through all this fat before you get to like the lean, mean game.
Well, even there, you've got the two sides of this coin, which are kind of being gotten at by Shem when he's talking about moth washing. Don't ever wash a moth. It's more about.
How would you know, Scott?
Well, I don't do it. I try to. I feel like the general conversation is that split between story chasing stuff and gameplay chasing stuff. Which was a whole conversation, obviously, as games got more cinematic across the end of the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and that idea of the blockbuster story. And what are we going to a game for? Do we want to experience a story, characters, writing, dialogue, like plot drive and character drive and resolutions and an ending? Or do you want gameplay and just gameplay and gameplay loops and satisfaction there? And I feel like as the industry's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, not everyone wants to sit down for a story, even though it can be a propulsive thing to get you through something. They want the casual set of gameplay loops, like you want to play online for a bit, and that's it. And your interaction with the gaming industry can begin and end with that. It doesn't need to be more than that. I like the story side of things. I think it's a good propulsive element, but its roots are more in literature and film, and it's not necessarily something that is endemic to the creation of the medium, like for gaming. And I feel like that's a constant back and forth. Like, it is interesting that Shen mentions mouthwashing, but the thing he's mentioning is the conversation around the story and what happens and whatever. It's not the gameplay. It's not a video game conversation. Like, it is about the thematics that are in that story. So that idea of the 100-hour games, the repeat monetization things, they serve the gameplay side of the audience. And I think a lot of the push and pull on the audience side is a back and forth between what do you actually want from a video game.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true, to be honest. I think When
I think you can have both.
Developers are making games now, and this might sound like a wanky distinction, but what are they making? Are they making games or are they making content? Are they trying to view their players and the audience as metrics, or are they trying to view them as people who are engaging with their brains as well as the, rat part of their brain that presses the pleasure button until it dies, right? And I don't think the story and gameplay are mutually exclusive or anything.
No.
I think you can have an impactful a time with a game that is memorable, that courts your emotions, that keeps with you, stays with you forever and ever. But that is mostly gameplay focused. Something like Tony Hawk's. How many times do we talk about those pro skater games, or even Underground, which is my beloved?
Well, that would be a perfect example of a short game lengthwise that you can replay for as long as you want.
That's absolutely right. But like you said, you can replay it for whatever you want. You can go as deep with the mechanics as you want. But I think something like that loop is different from, and I don't know, maybe this is a bad take, but is different from a live service loop where the goal is not to even necessarily jump into a game to have fun, to mess around with the combat, the trick system, and pull together these sick lines across the different levels in Tony Hawk's. It's there primarily so you can tick off a box and get your experience points up. I think they are two experientially very different states of mind to be in when you're engaging in a gameplay loop. And even though I played a lot of titles that are live service and rely on that stuff, like, I can't remember the challenges that I've ever done in Call of Duty games, right? I can't remember that kind of grindy element to it where the game has admittedly got me. It's hooked me. It's got me like a fish, Scott, and it's reeling me in to do this crap that I don't even
it's just
really take in.
Get 5 headshots.
Exactly.
Whatever.
But I remember on the opposite side of that, something that feels rewarding, and again, this will change for every person, but something that feels rewarding, that is repetitive, the glory days of Call of Duty 4, whatever, getting a gold gun or prestiging, that at least I attached a certain level of importance to it, rightly or wrongly, and I feel like we've gotten even away from that, where everything is content, everything is nebulous, nothing really matters, and a lot of the stuff that the gameplay loops are built around will be redundant or won't be remembered down the line because it's there just to tick that part of your brain, to keep you going, not to, I don't know, take you on a ride, I guess. I don't know what I'm talking about.
I think a lot of modern media is more about distractions and holding you for a bit and not giving you a sense of finality, which you would get with shorter games. But yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. I just think it's interesting. And obviously this thing, like I said, blew up, especially in regards to something like a Starfield, which is kind of regarded as a bit of a misfire compared to the Fallouts, the Elder Scrolls that are out there.